Why don't we go to church?
I love that he made me think about that again.
Too much story. Every time I hear "and then," there's another chance for the ladies at home to misunderstand.
So we finally have an answer to the question, what makes Don Draper smile?
I don't need you to put your little swirl on top of my idea.
Well, he knows how to leave a room.
My goodness, Sally Draper, try not to take everything so personally.
You really pour the honey on, then you lick it off.
See? It all works out.
He's loyal, charming, quiet but not modest.
Why should he be?
Welcome to Mad Men Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. It doesn't anymore. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015. And we're changing the conversation of the show all these years later, where one of us is a first-time watcher of the show, one of us went through it one time back when it was airing, and there's me, who watches it while doing laundry and catching my husband in a decades-long conspiracy. I'm John Negroni, and Will Ashton, it looks like you lost this podcast. It was such a great idea. Well, it's always in the last place you look.
Yeah, I mean, I was also going to comment on the fact that you often call us a weekly podcast when it's luckily if this comes out once a month, let alone once every other month, let alone once every 3 months at this point.
We record it once a week, though, right?
I mean, yeah, we record pretty frequently, but yeah, now they're now going to be 5 in the can. And
look, it is hard to edit these episodes. I don't think you guys appreciate and understand how hard it is to edit these. It takes a long time.
There's just too much romps, like too many inside jokes. So you have to. I
don't have a producer. It's tricky stuff. But before I forget, Mike Overholse, you really like to podcast the honey on and lick it off.
Are you a fabric softener guy, John? Tell me about your laundry habits.
I only have one more. The faintest ink is better than the best podcast. That's true. Today we're talking about The Color Blue, which is season 3, episode 10. After this episode, we only have 3 to go before the season finale. And say again?
I was gonna say, you were too busy talking. I wanted to do you say the color blue again.
Color blue.
Dabba dee dabba die, dabba dee dabba die.
It's blue and you're feeling all right, huh?
Now listen up.
So this episode was directed by Michael Uppendahl. It was written by Kater Gordon and Matthew Weiner. Michael Uppendahl, wow, such a great director of the show. Season 1, he started out not as a director. He had to really convince Matthew Weiner to get into the directing game with this show. But if you might remember Michael Uppendahl's work from season 2, which was 6 Month Leave. That was episode 9. Great episode of the show, I think. And are you done, Will?
What are you talking about?
You're right. This is the second episode Michael Uppendahl directed, and great. I think he does really good work. He's really good with actors. And as I mentioned, Kater Gordon co-wrote this episode with Matthew Weiner. I think this is probably one of the last episodes, or if not the last episode she ever worked on, because Kater Gordon is the writer who was fired from the show, accused Matthew Weiner of sexual misconduct, and we've talked about that on the show a few times before. But yeah, I'm not seeing her in any more credits. So I think this might be the last episode with her.
Damn, what a bummer of a thing to bring up during one of Will's best bits he's ever done. You son of a bitch.
People couldn't see, of course, but Michael Overholse was dancing, jiving, that whole thing. Very fun stuff and annoying. Well, Will, what did you think of the episode? I mean, this is definitely a somewhat unconventional episode of Mad Men. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's a little bit slower than the average, and not in a bad way. Like, it's just a little bit more contemplative, a little bit more withdrawn, I guess, as far as we don't really have a super splashy moment like you kind of expect with the buildup of this party. There's going to be a lot of conflict because we've spent this whole episode kind of dealing with these little conflicts that are building inside and outside the office, certainly with Betty and Dawn, but also with Peggy and what's his face? Paul.
Lane knowing about Sterling Cooper being
Lane and
sold.
his wife. Yeah. And then Roger and Dawn. A bunch of stuff's going on here. And yeah, I mean, I think it's been really interesting to see how much this season kind of digs into the home life as much as the work life, even more so maybe the home life as opposed to the work life, and how these characters, particularly with Dawn and Betty, are kind of losing something if they gain something or vice versa. And, we're coming off of last week, Dawn was just personally and professionally just, down, constant disappointment, losing, Hilton, all this stuff. But then now in this episode, he's, getting honored at this 40th anniversary party. Everyone's clapping for him, all this stuff. But then like his marriage is potentially imploding for the last time or whatever. And, continuing this affair and building secrets upon secrets even within there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting episode. Maybe not my favorite this season, but certainly one I'm excited to dig into a little bit more with you fine gents.
Glad you seem to like it. I want to mention real quick that I listened to the 2 commentaries for the episode on the DVD box set. One of them was, of course, Matthew Weiner and Michael Uppendahl. Weiner usually does these. And I also listened to Elisabeth Moss, Michael Gladys, and Jared Harris all together on one of the commentaries. And in both of them, they both talk about how the episode itself is really set up with that kind of Hitchcockian tension, very much simmering under the surface. So yeah, Mike, over to you, of course. I mean, this episode's it's a transition episode, right?
It absolutely is. I mean, this is another one of those where, typically, again, for listeners, we ourselves try to watch this week by week as we're doing these episodes. But this was another one where I just could not help myself. Hitchcockian is a great way to put it. It does build so much tension, and it just leaves you with a ton of anticipation for what comes next. And I personally could not help myself. I went on and I kept watching. I watched several more episodes just because, it's leading up to, what we've been waiting for so long. There at the end, and I love the way the party scene is filmed in itself. Since it's been talked about the entire episode, and then you finally get there, and all the behind the scenes implications that it has, and the look Betty gives. Not the best episode within itself, but within a string of episodes, one of the strongest, I think, season enders. Part of a season-ending arc that the show will have.
When you said like, "Oh, I couldn't help myself," I just imagined you like really sweaty and just like going into the apartment that is the show. Telling us that you're like, "Oh, I'm off to watch Ahsoka," and it's like, no. He's watching an episode of Mad Men again, behind our backs. And Mad Men is telling Mike to turn over. I don't know what I'm doing here. I am drinking some whiskey here. But it is early enough in the day. It's Indian whiskey. I don't know if you guys have ever had Indian whiskey before, but I just took a taste and it is good. I'd give it the same grade I'd give this episode of Mad Men. A B.
Aren't you like still working right now?
Yo, well, can you like be cool? Like, what the hell?
Well, you're just, like Mad Men or whatever, working and drinking on the job. I get it.
No, I mean,
it's Friday in corporate America. It barely counts. It's also the summer still.
I was going to say, I mean, it's not, Labor Day hasn't even happened. I mean, this episode will probably come out in October, but, maybe later.
I was going to say October is generous. I think the actors strike might end before this episode comes out.
Dune 2 will be released before we ever release this episode.
Dune 2 will be finished, as in, like, you could actually watch the entire movie. So I do like this episode. I find there's that whole story that Suzanne tells Don, like when they're getting all cuddly and stuff. And, I like their kind of dynamic. And of course, we're going to ask Will here in a second to rate and rank Don's affairs, or at least tell us where this one fits in. No pun intended. But I was kind of curious, like, about that whole like story she tells about the color blue. It was like, oh, the color blue could mean a different thing to you than it does to me. I think most people have that thought at some point. Matthew Weiner said that he got the idea from his son, the creepy kid who plays Glenn. Apparently, he brought that up with his Matthew Weiner's wife, his mother, and so he wanted to put that in the show. Did you guys ever have that thought? If so, like, do you remember like when that ever first occurred to you?
Big time. And I thought I was such a groundbreaker for thinking it. I was like, oh, this is such a unique thought I have.
I mean, it reminds me. Yeah, I mean, I remember, not to put him on the spot, but like when my brother was younger and I found out that he's colorblind and just like imagining like, oh, like just, inherently he views the world like entirely different from me. Like he just has a different visual plate. And I think that's kind of where I first had those kind of thoughts where I'm just like, the world as I see it, even just from a color standpoint, is because it's totally, different, but also can be very similar. So, yeah.
My dad's colorblind. I love more similarities in our lives. Well, we're best friends.
My dad's colorblind too.
Get the fuck out of here,
Wait,
John.
It's actually true.
Tyrone's colorblind? Yeah. Well, I mean, he just, he can't see black or white. He just, everybody, as I know Tyrone to be, just like a totally loving, accepting person.
People meet my father. My father, both my parents are Puerto Rican, and both of them are like fairer skin. Like I have pretty whiter skin, right? And which is interesting because a lot of people in my family don't, but they do. And Tyrone, people meet him and they assume like, oh, it's Tyrone, he's going to be black, but no, he's like this Puerto Rican guy. But you meet him and you're like, oh, he's like this kind of white, maybe waspy guy. But then he starts talking and you hear his extremely thick accent and people are like, I don't know what to do. This is too much. It doesn't help too that our name is Negroni. So his name is literally like Tyrone Negroni, like, and Negroni, like black, it's just, if anyone should be colorblind, I guess it is my father. Love you, Dad.
Okay, I see. Yeah, let's get him on the phone. Let's get him into this episode.
Guest. Whenever I try to explain to him what a podcast is, his eyes can become more colorblind. I think I thought I was going to say they glaze over, but
I mean, he likes radio, right?
He loves radio, big talk radio guy. I grew up on, the Rush Limbaugh was always playing in the car. But he doesn't get the podcast thing. He gets it. I shouldn't say that. I think to him, a podcast is just like a downloaded radio show. So like me doing something like this, sort of like, well, when was it on the radio? That doesn't make any sense. But maybe I'm not giving enough credit. I'll ask him.
You have to do your best Rush Limbaugh now, John. You brought him up. Give it to us.
Snurdly.
I
haven't practiced it.
What does Rush Limbaugh think about Roger Sterling in this episode?
Nothing at all.
He's dead.
Yeah. Well, you didn't watch it when it came out, you don't think? I mean, this isn't like a new thing, this episode.
I could see a guy, like, I think conservatives do watch, like, firebrand conservatives who are actually kind of liberal. Yeah. I think they do watch a lot of like shows like this, or at least they were at the time. But
I mean, you
think they're done.
I was gonna say, like, there are certainly like conservatives who like watch, like something like Sopranos, and then like just like the commentary and the things they're saying just kind of go over their head.
Well, it either goes over their head or they just choose to like accept what they like and reject what they don't, and just take it as it is. Sure. Like I remember I would do that when I was very conservative, like growing up that way. And like you would watch things like I knew stuff was like painted liberal or painted whatever, commie, but
sure.
You could compartmentalize, right?
All right, yeah. So when can we get Tyrone on the show?
Be interesting, He'd be like, the good old days. Like, Dad, no. Paul's like, Paul has some moments in here that were kind of like a little risque for television. It was funny because I was reading some of the old reviews that came out when this episode came out, and not everybody understood that he was masturbating in his office, which I found kind of funny. But if you listen to the commentary, Michael Gladys is like, and here's the part where I masturbate. And apparently in a scene that they cut, he like licked his hand, and they were like, no, you can't we can't put that in a TV show.
Man.
Pretty gross.
Yeah, he's a dirty dog in this ep.
He had a great idea. We get to meet
in the office?
Yeah. No. The great idea came later. Do you guys relate with that whole thing of like coming up with an amazing idea and then losing it?
Yeah, no, I don't jerk off in the office. I mean, if that's what you're asking.
Not that part. God.
I think they call it post-nut clarity, John.
Maybe I would blame it more on the jazz, personally. The combination of the jazz, the post-nut clarity, and then meeting a friendly stranger.
And don't forget the booze.
The booze, yeah, thank you. But yeah, no, have you guys ever had an idea and then it just poof, as Peggy says, poof?
Not really. My job in sales, it is a little bit creative, but it's a lot of like a similar thing that you're getting creative on and just finding new avenues to do it. I don't find myself in situations coming up with these brand new ideas much, but I'm sure it's different for you, John.
You probably relate more with like the selling of the ideas, right? Like when Paul has to sell the Aquanet ad and kind of like, jab and juke in that meeting. Like that's got to be like your day to day.
Yeah, no, I really relate with that, especially with people who are like, you have to read body language or respond to reactions to a certain thing you're saying to see if you want to continue going down that avenue or completely pivot to something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of like that one episode of Seinfeld where like he like writes something funny down his notepad like 3 a.m. and then like he has to try to figure out for the rest of the episode what he wrote. I feel like that's more kind of my relationship things where like at like 4 a.m. I wake up and I'm like, oh, I figured out my $1 million idea, and then like the next morning I read it and it's like dog peanut butter, and it's like, all right, well maybe next
we'll
time
there. We'll figure it out.
But no, I mean, are we supposed to know like from the context clues what the idea was, or is it supposed to be deliberately pretty vague?
I was curious about this too. I always assumed that it was supposed to be like your imagination is better than if they had like an official canon idea. So in the commentary that Matthew Weiner does, he says that like they never came up with an idea or anything. It's just, you know, you can they try to make it purposefully vague enough so that you can maybe have a hint of like, okay, Achilles, you know, maybe it has something to do with like the way he tells that story. But then in Michael Uppendahl, you know, he directed it in a way so that like Paul does bring it up, right? Like, he brings up that he talked to Achilles, like he did retrace his steps. He took Lois's advice, and it didn't work. It didn't work. Like the idea didn't come back. So it wasn't exactly that. And then when Michael Gladys is talking about it, he said that they wouldn't tell him because he asked, he's like, well, what is the idea? And they were like, it's the best idea that you came up with. Mm-hmm. And so he said that he came up with his own version of the idea. And then Jared Harris in the commentary is trying to get it out of him. And she's like, well, what is it? He's like, well, I can't tell you. And then over time, like Jared Harris kind of like picks out little pieces of it. And so Michael Gladys does kind of like give a hint of like his version of the ideas. It has something to do with like Hermes and like the Greek gods and like the messenger service and something like that. But then you're like, oh, interesting. So then I could kind of see how the idea would come out of that conversation. But then at the end, Michael Glass is like, but that probably has nothing to do with it. What the idea would have actually been if you read the text of the episode. Right. So no one knows.
I mean, like, since his name's Achilles, and like the first time we see him, it's on the ladder, and we see like his torso and his legs. I figured it was like some sort of like fall? Achilles heel kind of thing. Was like what he was going for.
I think like the winged feet. Like maybe he thought of the heel, but then the winged feet of Hermes is my guess. But yeah, I would say that I can't think of an idea that's better than what Peggy came up with.
It's just Red Bull gives you wings.
Western Union gives you wings.
Yeah, he figured it out like 30 years later, went back into the office and was like, I got it. And then, you know, that's how the Red Bull campaign began.
You guys like with Red Bull, when was the last time you guys drank Red Bull? Because I had one very recently with a vodka and watermelon, and it was disgusting. And I'm like, how do people still drink this?
My wife has one almost every single morning. She gets in the car, even though she works literally across the street, and she will drive out of her way to get a drink called a Rev Up, which is just a basically Red Bull soda with syrup.
So when like you go in, you're her secretary, obviously. So when you go in and you're like, coffee, and she's just like, no, not even a no, thank you. Like Allison.
Yeah, she actually hits me because I'm supposed to knock before I go in, and I kind of barged in. She's kind of angry, and the caffeine hasn't really hit her yet. So I get hit, I get verbally abused, and then I just have to.
As long as you remember to pick up. As long as you remember to pick up her tuxedo.
I think the last time I had a Red Bull was like when this episode came out. It would have been like 2009, if I recall correctly. Because I remember
you're more of a Four Loko guy.
I didn't really have that many. I did have, I think, at least one Four Loko in
like when it was like the real deal, though. Like it was, yeah.
Okay. Just because they were like so popular when I was in school. But I just remember like I guess like from like 2005 to like 2009, there would be like this like cart derby sort of thing in town. And I remember like one of the promotional vendors was Red Bull, and they had like these big like like display things. They were trying to like give them out, and I remember like that was the first time I tried Red Bull. I was like, oh, this is disgusting. And then like for years I would just like try to avoid it, but then like it got so hot that I was like, well, it's something, because I can't get water. So I just remember I would drink those and try to hydrate and just get too much energy or whatever. Speaking of something completely unrelated, I did also want to bring up that I like how this episode, I didn't pick up on it until this new like rewatch and everything, but I like how there's a lot of like connecting to the past in this in multiple ways, because there's the obvious thing where Bert is looking at that picture and he's thinking about how like, they started Sterling Cooper in the 1920s and all this time has passed, and he doesn't want to like relive the past because it reminds him of the people who he's lost. And then you also have like other threads of that, of like they're trying to sell a telegram, which is so old fashioned. It kind of feels like the main conflict of this episode, like trying to sell the past, trying to like adjust to the future. There's like little touches, there's that whole thing where, even a little thing like the money in the drawer, when Betty breaks into it, she just opens it, right? And she sees like all the money, and to her, it's like no big deal. It's not something that would shock her that somebody would keep that much money in the desk. And I've always found that kind of interesting. But according to Weiner, they said that was actually really common back then, because this is after the Great Depression and people didn't trust banks to put all their money in for good reason. And so like, I just like how the old fashionedness is like really crawling all over this episode. It's a nice touch.
Yeah, it's also just like feels like they're setting up a extended theme of defending the past, especially with what's on the horizon of Don and Dick.
Yeah. So Will, the big question of the episode, Betty knows, or she knows something's up. What was running through your head as all that stuff was starting to come to a head?
Yeah, I mean, I was interested, like, how much of it was she connecting and how much of it was just like a total blur. Because obviously she was going to confront Dawn and try to get answers. But like at this point, I'm not exactly sure what she can discern from that box and how much she actually is still just kind of totally in the dark about who Dawn is. But obviously, like the fact that Dawn had been previously married, kept that total secret from him, it seems to be a big red flag for Betty. And the big thing obviously is that she just doesn't know her husband, which has been true for this whole show, but like now it seems to be crystal clear to Betty. And yeah, I do feel bad for her, because she's like realizing her life, or at least her marriage, is a lie. So I'm curious to see where that goes for the rest of the season.
Yeah, like the cliffhanger, right? I mean, I could just imagine. I remember like watching that and just being like, when is she going to confront him? And then they keep prolonging it, and like just to make you sit there and like with Betty listening to Roger. Like it's so fake, right? Because like he's saying all this stuff about Dawn, and she has to sit there and grin and bear it. And I love too how like earlier in the episode, to put a finer point on it, Roger he has so much contempt for Dawn, hates his guts, and so like none of this is genuine. And it's just it's just this show really like digging at the whole thing of how fake people really are, to the point where I've been listening to these commentaries more and more, and I've been kind of unclear about this or on the fence about this, but like I kind of wonder if Matthew Weiner is like low-key a sociopath. That's a pretty heavy accusation, but I think he clearly has like some darkness, like some kind of like moral grayness to his own sort of like, it reminds me of like somebody who's really into Ayn Rand, which I know has been brought up in this show a lot. And it's complicated though, because he's not a reactionary kind of guy. He's just kind of like, I don't know. He strikes me as like Bert Cooper might be the character he relates with the most, maybe. Just want to put that out there.
I mean, I've kind of figured that was the case, but yeah, you can't beat me to the punch as far as saying that.
Makes you wonder. Like, I wonder what his son, if we could have his son on the show, Glenn Bishop himself, and just get all the tea. I'm sure he would spill it, right? Guess we'll have to wait and find out. So in terms of the like Sterling Cooper getting sold, what do you think about that too, Will? Because I know this is a big development. Did you kind of see this coming though, that like just the precarious situation they were in with Weiner?
Well, I mean, it's not officially sold yet. It's just that it's going on the market. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it didn't look promising when they were laying off like half the staff, and that, it just never seemed like they were on sure waters and had any like trust in the company as far as. Yeah,
it's like a false sense of security after, because you're like, oh, it's over now. But no.
Yeah, I mean, but I think Lane is at a point now where he is not only like alienated from the office and like the country, but like in his marriage, because I think he has some sort of like desire to stay in Sterling Cooper and like make it. And I feel like he feels like he connects more in this office place, and he seems to have a little bit more confidence now than he did at the beginning of the season as far as talking to Bert and even Roger. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not looking great for the comp.
I was thinking of you a lot, Mike, during that scene with like Lane and his bosses, and I'm just, because I know like you've gone through so much corporate nonsense in terms of like just people treating this stuff like people's livelihoods, and just being like, oh, it's so callous of like you made it lean, you fired all these people, and now you're just going to upend everybody's life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad reality, especially for the people at the top. It's at the end of the day, it is all a numbers game and maximizing profits, especially if you're getting ready to sell, because then, that's all these layoffs happen, right, when there's an economic downturn. But then it can also happen when you're at your best, because you want to maximize what you are valued at. And the less employees you have, the less billable hours you have, the more profitable your company seems. And so definitely resonate with that. It's also just so interesting to see, as the show has really wrestled with, what is your identity in relation to work, and to see it through the eyes of Lane, who, obviously has been his number one priority in life. And it still is, but now there's like the dichotomy of it's still is it to the company, or is it, is your job your company, or is it the people who actually work there? Because there's a big difference between the two now, more than there ever has been.
I do love the little peek we get into the like the British office, because it's like the first time we've really seen any sort of office space outside of Sterling Cooper in the show.
I was waiting to see Ricky Gervais. So
Sure.
No,
I
you're
just
right,
love
though, because
how-
you kind of see the city, right? And it's like a little bit darker. The decor
Right.
is different. They put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah, just like it's like muddier looking. It's like darker. It's more kind of it's like spaced out, but like there's just like an emptiness to it that's really stark compared to like kind of the more homey, brighter office space that we see in Sterling Cooper. And yeah, I mean, like that was a really cool, interesting touch. And I mean, you know, considering how they treated the guy who got his foot cut off, like how they're just like, well, he's gone. Like they have demonstrated before that they're pretty, you know, cold cutthroat about these things. So yeah, that wasn't really a shock for me.
And Lane even mentions, he's like, nobody's asked me where I've gone to school, you know, and it kind of hinting at that very British sort of like your identity is tied to these things, you know, and it's like that's your value, that's your worth. It all kind of flows together, doesn't it? I should write this down, unlike Paul, but I have been kind of noodling, especially in this season, with this like Mad Men pitch, you know, this like sort of like essay about how I don't think Matthew Weiner at all intended this, but I think you could view the entire series as like a tribute to like how capitalism can feasibly like transition into like a workers' rights democracy. Not specifically unions, but just the way that like, you know, you see the dysfunction of Sterling Cooper constantly, like these people at the top making all the decisions and nobody else getting a say. And I think Mad Men is like almost kind of unintentionally like a show that can help like educate people on like why it's important for people to like own, you know, part of the company, and for that to like, that's what really drives things like productivity and creativity and all those things. It would be an ambitious pitch, but you know, I got to write it down here. I've been drinking all this booze, and Will's
John,
been
take your
singing
hand
music.
out your pants.
Put that down, John.
Grabbed the wrong pen.
Oh, that's mean a little bit. But okay, we should probably talk about Don's affairs. I know I promised this earlier, but Will Ashton, Don's affair with Suzanne Farrow. I know it's a bigger one, and last season we really just had him with Bobby Barrett, right? What do you think of this affair compared to that, which I think I would say was definitely a low point. A lot of people would. A lot of people look at the affairs of like the first season, just in terms of the storytelling, not in terms of like, go Don, do that. But just in terms of him, you know, fooling around with other women and like what it means to his identity and all that stuff. First season, we had like Midge and Rachel. This season, it's really just her. But now that it's kind of developing into something a little bit more specific and tangible, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit last week. I mean, I think so far.
Well, this is where it's really happening. All they did was kiss last week. Relax.
Sure. But no, I mean, I think, you know, I kind of joked or quipped that, you know, she's my favorite Gomar so far for Don, you know, obviously referring to Sopranos. But yeah, I mean, I think there's just something really fascinating about her where it kind of goes back to, I think it was with Rachel, where like whenever we see Don intimate with Suzanne, it does feel like he isn't really the Don persona, like when they're in bed together. Even like that moment where before Don meets Suzanne's brother, like the look on his face expresses this sort of like intimacy and innocence that's more akin to Dick than it is Don. Like he doesn't feel...
He's more relaxed.
Right. Yeah, he just doesn't feel...
It's like when he was with Anna Draper last season.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think there is something to be said about... It does feel like this... you know, I mean, not to say an affair is good for Don, because obviously it's not. He's a married man with children.
I think you kind of said that last episode. I think we all did. It's just like, oh, good, Don's having an affair. Now he's going to have the best ideas.
Right. And I mean, it does seem like, I don't know, it's not like he's like fully back to normal, but he does seem a little bit more present and a little bit more like...
Got his mojo.
Yeah, he's got his mojo a little bit back in there a bit. But yeah, I mean, you know, as much as I can enjoy Don, you know, cheating on his wife, I think this is I don't know. I like Suzanne. I mean, I think
it's
there's
just
something
so fucked up. It's his kid's teacher.
I know.
2 miles away from his house. It's dangerous stuff. But I mean, I think that's what makes it all the more tantalizing, right?
But I think it's just interesting too, because I forget if it was last week or the episode before, but she was talking about like how resistant she was to doing this affair because he's like, oh, you're close to your kids, your family, people know me in this town, people know you in this town, all this stuff. But now she's like kind of like open, like she visited him on the train and, you know, like she wants him to meet her brother and all this stuff. And
I mean, once you get that Dick, I mean, Whitman.
Once you get that Dick Whitman,
I mean, I think he kind of, You know what it is about the affair, though? I think they just like genuinely like each other. That's why I think it's happening the way it is. Like, I just think that they genuinely want to be around each other. They're nice to each other. They have intimate conversations, and there's real chemistry.
I feel kind of opposite about it, and I think what attracts Don to her is that Dick Whitman side of him. I think that's who he would have. A person like that is who he would have chosen. A school teacher, a simple life, instead of going for someone like Betty because he was going for the status and what he was supposed to do as Don. Yeah, but it kind of feels like I think she likes Don. I think she, is this school teacher who lives in in someone's garage attachment that, it's common today, but back then would be even like way more looked down upon and very, I think, lower living in class. And I think she's likes the idea of like this successful man, he's mysterious,
I disagree completely.
No
I think the Don thing, I think she has lust for Don, to be certain. But I think like the real where love could blossom, I think that's when she gets to know the real him, when they're like in bed, and like that's where I think she's the most relaxed and like really falling for him.
She seems so juvenile. I feel like she's just looking for a responsible man to take care of her because she's taking care of her brother.
She's a hippie. She wants to have sex because it feels good. And she gets that, but then she also gets the connection. And I think that she's like thrilled that like, here is a guy that can satisfy both sides of like her desire.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think the reason why she feels more comfortable being open with Don is because I think initially, like you're saying, Mike, I think she was attracted to the Don Draper persona.
Yeah. I think the
reason, but I think the reason why the affair is blooming is because Don now is showing like that poetic side to himself, and she's seeing that like kind of more, open California side that we saw in season 2, where, like the side of him that feels more understanding and expressive and creative and all that stuff. I think that's why she wants to blossom this relationship more, is because she's like, peeling back the layers and seeing that this man she was initially, this man that initially she just felt like an attraction to is actually someone that she's compatible with.
And it's just, I think it's very similar to what happened with Don and Rachel in a lot of ways, but obviously like the context is totally different. But yeah, I mean,
I will just say still, for the record, Rachel Menken #1, still on my list.
I'm a little undecided. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm Team Betty and I just can't admit it. Why not Don and Rebecca Price? Why not? I did want to bring up too something that has always really grabbed me about this episode, where like you really feel that like when the brother comes into the picture and Don is like very uncomfortable, it reminds me, I think it should remind the audience a lot of his own brother, of Adam. And like there's so many cues to that. And like it kind of gets me, like the way that he's very uncomfortable at first. It's just like when his brother kind of barges into his life, but you see that he has grown up. He has learned his lesson in that respect, and he decides not to just cart somebody off with a bunch of money. He's like, here's my card. And like, I think he feels like this kid could go down the same path his brother did, and is like, I gotta be here for him because I see him as like that. I see him as like my shot at redemption, in fact. And it's sad, it's harrowing, and it's one of those things where like the brother obviously doesn't give a crap about Don. He's just like, whatever, dude. I don't care about you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that especially, but I think there is like, it kind of goes back to the episode earlier this season where he picks up like what he thinks is like this newlywed couple that's like trying to start their own life. I think there is an attraction to him to like this younger, freer lifestyle where like people can change and adapt on their own will. But I think especially that scene that you're referring to, like at the end where like the overhead lights are on and he's like giving him money and stuff. It's like very much him trying to like reconcile with the loss of Adam, and like trying to like kind of push it forward and being like, spiritually I'm giving this to Adam, not Rachel's brother, who I feel like in season 1 he would have just been like as dismissive of him as maybe like those hippies where he's like, whatever, like you can do, it's your life, you can mess up however you want. But yeah, I mean, I think there is just something very Adam like about this kid that he wants to be protective of.
Well, it kind of feels like it starts going down that road, right? And that's the growth you see in Don, because he starts like, it's not too late for you to do this. Like, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, he does that whole speech. But then the important thing is that he actually listens when the brother responds with like, actually, I can't. Like, I have a medical condition that stops me from doing this, which I think for me is also very sad to see because, I don't think the show ever outright really says it, but he's epileptic, right? That's and it's something, so treatable these days, right? Accommodations are made for it, like, just 20, 30 years later, and he would have such a completely different life compared to what he receives. But Don listens to that and he understands, like, you're right. You do have a different situation. Not everybody is like me and can do the same exact things, right? Where you've seen him just trying to make replicas of himself everywhere else with Adam, with Peggy, wherever it is. So I thought that was interesting to see. But he still lies. He still lies to Suzanne when he comes back.
Yeah. I do appreciate, by the way, since you brought up Peggy, I love I love all the Don Peggy stuff in this. It's not a lot, but just like that moment when she takes Paul's sort of like offhanded remark about the faintest ink and she's able to like remix it into an idea, and then she like builds on it with Don like in the room on the fly, and like Paul's look at her, like the first time I watched this show many times ago, that's always stuck with me. That realization he has where he's like, my God, like he realizes that A, she's better than him, and B, like he is just, I think that he kind of like realizes something about himself of like, this is not what I'm meant to do, because it's not something that, I don't think it brings him like full fulfillment. This has been my personal read. I don't know if it's something that it's something everybody would agree with, but yeah, I watch this and I just see it's like a big a stirring in Paul of like, maybe advertising is not the thing just because it makes me money. We've seen over the course of the show Paul constantly battling with this idea of like being more bohemian, and he wrote that whole play. I think that it's a very, very stark moment for our one Paul Kinsey. So I know, Will, you were upset that unlike Paul, there's no Sal in this episode.
Yeah. I mean, well, sure, but I mean. I was hoping it would be like the sort of the Poochie thing where like every time Sal's not in the room, characters are asking where's Sal, when's Sal coming back, I miss Sal, all that. But I didn't get that.
There's something to that, right? That everybody's moved on already. That new guy or not new guy, he's been in the show since season 1, but like he just kind of takes Sal's place and everyone's just like, yep, move forward.
Fuck that guy. He's such a poser. He thinks he can come in, have the same chemistry and the wit,
the same
that Saul
debonair,
had. Debonair. Yeah. How dare he? He
would have said about he would have had the Aquanet in his hair, Sal, and he would have sold it so well.
Right. That's what I was thinking too. I was just like, man, Sal would have sold this role, and this guy is just a poser. Just thinks he can put it on. That's all he has to do. Get this guy. Raw man died.
Sorry, Will. Sorry you had to go through that.
Well, I'm just glad that eventually Sal's going to come back and rectify this whole thing.
I do want to mention, since you bring up Sal, Lois, she didn't get fired after the lawnmower thing. I have an answer to this. I know why now. I've wondered this for years and years of like, is this a continuity thing? Like, how does Lois still have her job? It doesn't make any sense. I have the answer. But first, I want to open the room. Do either of you have a theory, or the answer already? Why does Lois still have her job? There is a reason.
Isn't it because she, what's his face, takes the fall for it? He says like it was his fault, or like because he brought in like the lawnmower and blah blah blah.
No,
and like went to bat.
I don't think that's really it. No, you could maybe read that part into it, maybe as being part of the calculation, but I think there's a stronger motivation here. I don't know. Will's pondering. He's got his pondering face on.
I don't know. I mean, did they just kind of consider it like a freak accident and believe that? No. Did
they like it? Are they glad it happened because they fucking hated the guy?
Because so according to Matthew Weiner, he said in the commentaries, like, people keep asking me this, and I'm like, it's very simple. She saved the company. And they decided like her doing that, like Roger in particular, because they hated this guy and they knew that he'd be the end of it, and they kind of felt a little gratitude toward her. That's the reason. And I'm like, you know what? Sure. You got us there, Matt Weiner. You got us.
I love the idea of her saving the company. Like they add her to the masthead, or like it becomes a logo. It's just like her on the lawnmower with her bow legged.
Sterling Cooper Lois.
She just fails her way to the top.
Yes. No, she defects obviously to go work for Chauncey, but he rightfully fires her. Her ideas are garbage.
Yeah.
I don't have too much else here. I was going to ask you guys if, so we do have I mentioned this before about how Roger, he just hates Don right now. We've been kind of tracking this over the course of the season. I just wanted to bring it up again of like, it's starting to feel like sometimes like when he's saying this stuff about Don, he doesn't mean it, but he has this bitterness toward Don. And like, where do you guys think that's really coming from? Like, what do you think the state of that is at this moment with Roger looking at Don and just being like, screw him, which we know he's really saying fuck him, but it's on TV. Do you buy it? What do you think is behind that?
Well, I mean, we've been seeing him get increasingly more insecure about himself. I think that's a big reason why he had the affair and subsequent new marriage with Jane, who we finally get to see again this week in this episode. After it's been a while since she's been here, right? Since my old Kentucky home. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think.
Does Mona know? That's a great line.
I mean, I think there is like a resentment as far as like Don left for a long time. I think he feels like he has kind of abandoned his post, which he did. And like he's kind of the reason like things are going to shit right now in the company because he wasn't there to be Don Draper and do what was necessary. And now he's just kind of coming in and like thinks he owns the place. And yeah, I think that's eating at Roger's increasing insecurity.
It's hard for me to comment on this because I have a hard time separating, like taking what I know and putting myself in like just right here in this moment with Roger and Don, because their relationship is so intertwined and complicated throughout the course of the series.
Yeah, it is tough.
I would say, that I would agree with Will. I think a lot of it comes from an insecurity and professional jealousy. We're not too many episodes removed from Roger not even being on the goddamn chart and getting etched in.
Yeah.
Right. To Don getting an award and being the main guy at this ceremony.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
because guy walks into an advertising agency. That was 4 episodes ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because like his name's like on the company and stuff, but I feel like kind of superfluous at the moment, and he feels like it's really like Don and Lane and Bert that's kind of running things at this point, and Bert even seems to be having sort of a doubt of faith at the moment as well, which is sad to see. Yeah. I feel like he needs to open up that Atlas Shrug again or the Fountainhead to warm up his spirits, but yeah, I mean. They're just waning spirits over at that Sterling Cooper, except for Peggy.
Except for Peggy. I would say too, because I agree with you guys. I would add that, like, I think like Roger, he just feels like Don has like totally rejected him. And the thing that I like most about their dynamic is that I think that they're an interesting case study in like male friendships. And how sometimes that the way they start, the way they sort of grab, and they change over time. Of like season 1, Don and Roger were, they were pretty like buddy. Like Don didn't really connect with anybody else in that office. It was mainly him and Roger kind of running the show. But Don very much, there was like a clear power hierarchy where Don really like looked up to Roger, felt reliant on Roger. And then from season 2 to season 3, we saw more and more of like, well, first in season 1, when Roger, his health issues started to like really chip away at that facade of like Don feeling like he owes this guy because, as Roger reveals in this episode, Roger's the one who found him. He's the one who came across Don when Don was like nowhere near the Don he is today. He was working at a fur company. He was in night school, right? So maybe there'll be more about that later. Who knows? But I think that like over the course of these seasons, as like Roger has left his wife and done all of these things, he's made all these decisions to sort of try to, find a way to make himself happier. And Don has done nothing but judge that, resent it to Roger's face, reject him, and put on a front, and also start to encroach upon his job, encroach upon his status at Sterling Cooper. And like, to have a friend do that, I think somebody that Roger genuinely saw as a friend, but I don't think Roger ever really understood the power dynamic the same way Don did. I think Roger took it for granted in a lot of ways. And that's why I think that this icy Cold War between these two guys is so thick. And it's not something like Bert tries to send him off to the barbershop to talk it out. It's not going to work. Like you can't really resolve stuff like that way. I think that just Roger at this point is just over it. He's over Don. He doesn't want anything to do with the guy anymore.
Yeah, I think it is accurate that he doesn't understand like Don does, right? You also don't even mention him making a pass at Betty, which I think was the first misstep. And then it seems like from that moment on, and then when he has when he's getting carted out and he has to remind him, your wife's name is Mona, I think is where like the last bit of respect as a mentor, boss, whatever it was, and in both lifestyle and career was lost for Don. And I don't think he'll ever understand that.
Totally. Last thing I wanted to mention was I love the way this whole episode builds up to Betty finding the keys. You know, it starts with Don getting the money from Lane. It's set up episodes before of like signing the contract, and the way that he like opens up the desk to put the money in, but then because baby Jean cries, like he forgets to like, he still has the keys in the robe. And then we have all those scenes where like Betty is like doing laundry, and it's like the tension is so thick, especially on rewatch where you really understand where this is all heading. It's really well done. I think it's a shame that Michael Uppendahl doesn't direct more episodes of the show. I think he does do one more in season 4, but I don't remember if he does any. I think he at least does one like once a season, at least. So he's a really talented guy. I'm not sure what he's up to these days. I'll call him up for you guys and catch up.
He made Oppenheimer, did he?
Yeah, director of Oppenheimer. He's also Cillian Murphy. Was there anything else you guys wanted to bring up and talk? I mean, I think we covered it, right? What else we got? I know. Oh, yes. You wanted to bring up Sally's, sudden interest.
Oh,
in
yeah,
church.
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like Sally is on the path to righteousness finally.
Mike's shaking his head.
Like after all these episodes where Sally is dousing herself in sin, she's finally asking why don't they go to church more, which is, she's showing the path of accepting Jesus and the Lord into her heart. And I think that's a positive development. I'm excited to see where Sally's journey in faith goes from this point forward.
I've definitely been in that situation where, like, because my family went to church every week. Hispanic, church was just like Carla's family. It was just like ingrained. Like you didn't miss church. It wasn't just Christmas. I didn't understand the idea of like, oh, some people only go to church like twice a year. I didn't get that until like elementary school when I went to a friend's house, and it was this kind of more like Draper household, it's like a little bit more upper crust. And obviously there are lots of like well-to-do white evangelical families, whatever. But this was like one of those kinds like in the show where like, I think somebody brought it up in the house of like, cause I think I brought up like, oh, I can't stay tonight cause we have church in the morning. And he's like, you go to church, but it's not Easter. It's not Christmas. And I was like, what? Well, yeah, but it's Sunday. Like what? And then he was just like, he looked over at his mom who was sitting there. It was just like, almost like kind of like Sally. It was just like, how come we don't go every week? And she was just like, she just laughed. Like, I don't even remember what she said. I think she said something under her breath, and I had caused a little bit of a snafu there. I don't know.
I do like to imagine Sally going to like an AME church, which is like very like high praise, like, think of Sister Act kind of deal. And, she's there.
I thought you were going to go for like the LGBT, like the Methodist kind of church where it's like accepting and hippie.
No, I'm specifically taking Sally to Black church. Like,
okay,
we're there. We're having a good time.
Carla's there.
Carla's there, like the choir, they're doing their thing. And all of a sudden the choir splits, the spotlight opens, and comes out the soloist. It's Chauncey.
I thought you were gonna say it's the Barbie that she thinks is a ghost.
That's who's giving the sermon.
There you go. It's a 1-2 punch. But yeah, and then also I think it's adorable when she does the like, can I do it? Can I answer the phone? And then both Don and Betty are on edge because they think it's one of their paramours, and Sally just like, they hanged up. So they hanged up line. She actually, Kiernan Shipka herself, the actress who plays Sally, she came up with that. Like she ad-libbed that during the reading, and they loved it. So they put it into the show, which I thought was kind of cool.
I read that too. But it actually was the second ad lib line. Then that was the second take that they used. Do you know what she said
It
in
was
the
the first one. No, I don't.
She said she says, "Oh, they're asking for Sabrina the Teenage Witch. That's me."
I was
They're
gonna
being
ask, when Peggy burps, was that like in the script, or was that like kind of
that was they so Peggy in the commentary, or Elisabeth Moss, was like, oh yeah, that's not my burp. I can't do that on command. Yeah, so they ADR'd it after.
Oh, okay. I thought that might have been like something that like she did accidentally, but they were like, oh, that's fun, let's put that in the episode.
Yeah, it kind of comes off that way, doesn't it?
Can you guys burp on command?
Yeah, I'm not gonna do it right now. I'm a lady. Okay, so but I do love like when Sally is just like, she's just like being chill. She's just like, huh, yeah, that's weird. They heard, I could hear them on the other line, huh? And then Betty's just like, goodness gracious, Sally Draper, don't take everything so personally. Sally's just like, geez Louise. I love it. I just love that moment. It's so funny. That's it. That's all I got.
I'm just excited for the whole spin-off show, which is just Sally in therapy talking about Betty.
She's like, I don't understand this woman. A little extra. All right. Well, if that's everything, I guess we'll call it. And then next episode, we're going to talk about the gypsy and the hobo. I know what you're thinking. We already have a Mad Men episode called The Hobo Code. Another hobo? You're right. And we're going to get to that. So we'll see you all in the next Mad Men. And thanks for listening.
Dabba dee, dabba die. Dabba dee, dabba die.